things. Recently, as you know, with World War II, the victory of World War II, I called up France and they were celebrating the victory. Well, we helped them a lot, as you know. I don't have to get into that. But I called up other countries. They were all celebrating the victory. We're the only country that didn't celebrate the victory. And we're the one that won the war. Okay. If it wasn't for us, that war, you would be speaking German right now. Okay. We won the war. And you might be speaking Japanese too. I mean, you might be speaking a combination of both. We won the war, and we're the only country that didn't celebrate it. And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester that wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but this is people that hate our country. But they will be met with very heavy force.
Hello, Bobby Jones here for MeidasTouch and Valor Media Networks. Typically, when I come on this channel and this platform, I'm able to speak about something that is of interest both in the United States and how it reaches out internationally. It's usually something where I'm able to lay out the history and tell you why it should matter to you today. Today is going to be much of the same. However, there is a personal element to this particular topic. So, President Trump has ordered a 250th anniversary Army parade that just happens to coincide with his 79th birthday. Now, for those who are not aware, the United States of America doesn't really do military parades. But Donald Trump has been insistent on something like this since his first term going back to 2017. We're going to talk about why America winces at parades, how it's against our culture, but most importantly, why Trump is so hell-bent on having it. And then I'm going to connect the events that are happening in the United States, specifically in Los Angeles, California, with the National Guard, the United States Marines, and the suppression of the First Amendment, why that whole thing actually makes sense in Donald Trump's mind. First, let's talk about the history of parades in the United States. The United States has very rarely had national parades. As a matter of fact, you can count on less than 10 fingers how many national parades the United States has had. So let's take you back in history. There was no parade to celebrate the American Revolution. As a matter of fact, the first national parade took place in May of 1865, and that was at the end of the Civil War. Originally, there was no parade planned, none whatsoever. But the organizers decided to have it because in the wake of the assassination of President Lincoln, they needed something to lift the nation's spirit. So they used that parade to not only celebrate his legacy, but the future rejoining of the United States of America. At that time, right after the Civil War, the southern states that rebelled against the Union had not been readmitted fully to the United States. But this was supposed to be something that gave a hand up and a good faith gesture to the former rebellion states, the Confederacy. The United States then went into the 20th century and entered World War I. And at the end of World War I, there were two parades to celebrate the victory of the Allies, one in D.C., one in New York. General John Blackjack Pershing marched his armies down both streets. And it was the first time that the United States was really recognized as an international power. Thus the celebration, thus the World War standard of celebrating a victory with a parade. However, it was not about the president. It was not about the civilian leadership. They made a point to highlight the soldiers, the doughboys, and all the other service members who went abroad to fight for the first time. Fast forward to World War II, much of the same thing. There were two parades, two major national parades to recognize World War II. The first recognized victory in Europe, VE Day. That happened in 1945. While the war in the Pacific was still going on. And so then they had another one in 1946 where those who had fought in the Pacific War and those that fought in the European theater were able to be jointly recognized. And it was a massive parade because the United States and the Allies won the largest conflict in the history of humankind. You really didn't see the current president Harry Truman running around patting himself on the back. As a matter of fact, he was pretty low key considering. All right. So every parade that they had an ulterior motive up until this point outside of the commander in chief, aka the president of the United States. America did not have a major national parade anywhere near those previous parades for almost 50 years. As a matter of fact, you had inauguration parades where the president would take the oath of office and then, would march down to the White House symbolically. That happens every time we have an election. But the ones in 1948, 1952, and 1960, those three, which was Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, were made to be very large because they were trying to send a message in the heart of the Cold War. And that is the first time where you really see modern military units really be pushed to the forefront because of the messaging. This was to counteract the messaging that was happening in the Soviet Union at the time with Khrushchev and everybody else who came to power there demonstrating military might. Despite America participating in the Korean War, the first unified action of the newly created United Nations, and the escalation and participation in the Vietnam War, there were no parades of national significance between the end of the Johnson administration all the way to the 1990s. That includes the 200th or the bicentennial celebration of the United States in 1976. As a matter of fact, the parade that happened in 1991 at the conclusion of Desert Storm was so weird to people that you can Google the articles, Washington Post, everybody saying this is a little bit over the top. Is this really necessary? As a matter of fact, they also included Korean War vets and Vietnam War vets in that parade because people felt guilty that those people, those veterans of those wars, were never properly recognized. So the actual parade was not just the Desert Storm people, but the last two wars before that. But it still felt weird to the American psyche. Fast forward to today. Donald Trump started talking openly about having this type of parade after going to France and witnessing the Bastille Day parade with President Macron. Now, the irony of this is I don't think Donald Trump understands what Bastille Day is and what it meant in France, and the razor of the revolution, if you will, all of that. But he just saw something where power was paraded in front of one person and he was hooked. Then as he traveled around the world and saw the formal processions and proceedings of him arriving and being an official head of state and everybody giving honors and rendering honors, he became hooked on that recognition. He became hooked. People have talked about it. So he kept talking about why doesn't the United States do that? And in the first administration, you had people like General Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense, General Kelly, who was his chief of staff, who had to try to explain to him that that is not American military culture. It's not about celebrating how big your stick is. It's about recognizing people, the service members, the troops that you are responsible for if you're going to do any type of recognition. It's not about showing that you have weapons. Everybody has weapons. And the United States is not typically the ones to talk or brag about it. Why is he doing this? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's the same reason that he is sending the National Guard and active duty Marines to Los Angeles. He has an inferiority complex because he comes from a world where he, as a businessman, was able to do pretty well in business. No matter how he got there, he has always been recognized as a businessman. But we're talking about someone who prides themselves on the idea of being a man's man, the apex of masculinity. And from the time he was a young man and had to go to New York Military Institute because his parents couldn't deal with him as a teenager, he recognized that the military has always been looked at the apex of masculinity in American culture. This is why he is trying to whitewash it and take women out of it and minorities out of it, because in his mind, a picturesque American man is a chiseled jawed soldier that happens to be a white man. That's what he believes. And so what he wants is the people who he is low-key jealous of, to pledge fealty to him, to bend a knee to him, and most importantly, make it publicly known that they serve him. The fact that he threatened protesters of this parade before the parade even starts, whether it's legal, lawful, peaceful protests or not, says he is worried about how people perceive him in that particular sphere. The irony of it is the people that are marching in front of him are the ones that have sworn to defend and give their lives if need be to protect the right of people to protest, to do exactly what he's threatening. This parade has nothing to do with America. It doesn't. And if that's not enough for you, for those who don't know, you can go to the website, Google America 250th, and see the parade details. You can get access to very important people in government, to include the President of the United States, if you donate a large amount of money. He's pimping soldiers. This is not about America. This is about him, because he's a small guy that honestly does not have the intestinal fortitude to do what so many of those young people marching in front of him chose to do.
New Meidas merch drop. Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more. All at store.MeidasTouch.com.